Great, thank you very much. So, hello, my name is Ruth Cammies. I'm the University Archivist at the Open University. So from its creation in 1969, the Open University had to meet the challenge of delivering higher education to students at a distance. While this is a challenge in any subject, obviously the practical fields of science and technology were a particular challenge. So today I'm going to look at how the OU met this challenge by using clips and images from our University Archive collection. So we're lucky, very lucky in the OU archive that many of the OU's early pioneering developments were captured on camera. So from the very beginning, the OU ran television series for students on how the OU was created and how it would work. Many of the clips I'll be showing today came from these programs, these kind of magazine-style programs, or from the teaching materials, teaching programs themselves. So here are the topics that I'm going to run through in this presentation. We've got OU student numbers, printed materials, access to OU equipment and home experiment kits, teaching via the television, pioneering ways of communicating with students, summer schools and assessment. So the first area that I'm looking at is the huge number of students. So the OU gained its Royal Charter and officially became a university in 1969. The date to start teaching had been set for January 1971. So that meant there were less than 2 years to build the campus for staff and create a national network of regional and national offices and study centres, create the courses, design and build a very complicated administration system, and take on the students. A figure of 25,000 places was set for the first year of teaching, and this was really a huge undertaking. As you can see from the article on this slide, in a very early staff newspaper edition, Europe's biggest mailing machine was installed at the university to just cope with the mailings. So the first clip I'm going to play from the archive today shows some of the warehousing that the OU uses, and the clips right back from the 70s. This was the warehouse holds student content and mailings and describes the first year's student inquiries and applications. So, it's going to work. Here we go.
And the work of preparing for an intake of 25,000 students continued, and a vast machine had to be created to cope with those numbers. When the OU announced its plans for the first 4 foundation courses, no one knew what the response would be. 130,000 inquiries were received, and of these, 43,000 people applied for places, proving beyond doubt the need for such a university.
Okay. Remember how to get rid of that. Right. So OU courses from the beginning had several elements, including the printed course books, television and radio programs, home experiment kits, summer schools, written assignments, examinations, and face-to-face tuition sessions. So the creation of OU courses involved a wide variety of roles, as you can imagine, from the academic staff, designers, television producers, obviously librarians. OU courses and qualifications had the same status as higher education from other universities, but were offered to anyone, regardless of previous academic background. So from the beginning of 1971, the finally enrolled students, and eventually there were about 19,500 in that first year that actually enrolled, each required a set of course books and supplementary papers through the post. This is just a few images from some of these early OU printed course materials here on this slide. So the Science Foundation course alone had nearly 300 individual text items, including the core books and a huge range of supplementary papers, including science data books, packs of graph paper, errata, broadcast notes and diagrams. Things were made a lot more complicated in that first year by the National Postal Strike, which began in January 1971 and lasted 7 weeks. In his first annual report, the Vice-Chancellor, Walter Perry, describes the Dunkirk spirit of staff going to great lengths to ensure students got their materials by driving them across the country and delivering them to study centres and students' homes. So as well as printed materials, OU courses required access to equipment. In 1971, that first teaching year, 300 OU study centres had been set up across the UK for students to study, have face-to-face tutorials with their tutors, listen or view OU programmes if they couldn't access them at home, or to use an OU computer terminal for the computing elements of the course. 7,000 students in that first year required access to computer terminals. Every student on the OU Maths Foundation course was required to have practical experience of computing. So for the 250 students who couldn't get to a computer terminal, they were required to write programs in the basic language and post them to the student computing service, where they would be tested in the computer and their results returned by post. This next clip I'm going to play, taken from an OU course programme from 1975, describes the OU computer installed at Alexandra Palace in North London.
I am in the computer room of the Student Computing Services London installation at Alexandra Palace. Most of the Open University computer terminals in the south of England link into here using the post office data equipment. On my right are some of the post office modems and their associated control equipment. Over on my left we have the various hardware components of our time-sharing computer system, including 2 mini computers. Let me first take you through the various components of this mini computer system. At the top left is a standard magnetic tape unit, which you're familiar with. Immediately below it is one of the Hewlett-Packard mini computers. This computer has 8K words of store, each word consisting of 16 bits, as is the case in many modern mini computers. All the computer terminals are linked into this computer as an intermediate step before information is transferred to the main computer. Above it on the right is another Hewlett-Packard mini computer, but this one has a larger store of 32K words and is the main computer of the time-sharing system.
Okay, so hide away that mini computer there. So, the next slide. So as well as accessing equipment at OU study centres, it quickly became clear to OU staff that students, particularly on the Science Foundation course, would require equipment at home. In this next clip, Mike Pence, the very first Dean of Science, talks about his experience of creating the first OU science course, including the invention of the OU course team and the home experiment kit.
The new academic staff who joined the OU in the early years found themselves heavily engaged in working in course teams, an entirely new concept and one of the university's outstanding innovations.
Of course, we had to invent the whole thing more or less as we went along. It was an enormous bit of improvisation. I mean, there we were. We had a course team. We had to make a course. Nobody knew how you did this. We weren't even quite sure to start off with why we wanted a course team. We learnt about that in the process. And we had to improvise every aspect of the whole system, of what sort of course materials are appropriate for the part-time distant learner. How should they be produced? How should they relate to each other? I mean, the most elementary things hadn't occurred to people. Nobody, for example, realized that you actually had to have professional editors. And as the time for actually producing the foundation course loomed up on us, I remember going along to Walter Perry and saying, for God's sake, we've got to have an editor, or you won't have a course, or you'll have a dead dean or something. We had no editors. The idea of a computer-marked assignment, for example, which is commonplace now, that had to be invented. Home experiments. I mean, the invention of home experiments was really quite ludicrous. It went right back to or it must have been in the spring of 1969, and I remember the bursar coming into my office in Belgrave Square. That was before we moved up in the world to the prefabs at Walton Hall. And he said, "Hey, I hear you've got some idea about home experiment kits." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, can you tell me how much they're going to cost?" Oh, well, when do you want to know? So he said, "Tomorrow," you see.
Just hide that there. So OU science home experiment kits, right from the beginning, often contained over 100 items, including chemicals and safety goggles, I should add, Bunsen burners, tripods, gas canisters, microscopes, beakers, test tube racks. One item from the very first OU science experiment kit was the MacArthur microscope, which you can see there in the middle of that screen. Which won the designer a Duke of Edinburgh Award design for its lightweight plastic design. So at this stage, originally in the presentation, I was going to do a bit of a show and tell type section and hold up some of our items from our home experiment kits over the years. Unfortunately, obviously, they're locked up in our archive vault back in Milton Keynes, but I thought I'd share a few pictures anyway. So many of the items were remade specially for the OU with OU branding. Others were of OU design, such as this basic example of a very basic electronics board, the Desmond. And you probably can't see there, but the Desmond stands for Digital Electronic System Made of Nifty Devices, which I love. We've also got a Viewmaster there, and some people may remember having these as children. I certainly did, although I think mine contained Disney images rather than microscopic views of chemicals, which the science students were treated to. So there's a wide variety of items. Some psychology kits included aquariums with instructions to go and purchase a fish and observe its behaviour, while the TAD 292 course kit included a Polaroid camera and film, plastic ping pong balls and a roll of cork sheeting. So it's a fun collection. One of the kits contains a 40-year-old shrink-wrapped corn on the cob, once posted to an OU student. Another contains a full-size electronic keyboard for one of the music courses. So home experiments kits today are rarer, as we can do so much more online, obviously, but occasionally kits and items of equipment are still sent out. Recently, we received a VR headset, which was sent to students studying a law course for a virtual courtroom experience. Moving on. So the next area of early OU teaching I'm going to talk about is the television and radio programmes. So ask many people about the Open University and they will fondly remember the late night television programmes. Even if they did not study with the OU, many people have memories of watching programmes about the various subjects, often in the middle of the night. So back in 1963, when Harold Wilson described his vision, it was for a university of the air, utilising broadcasting on television and radio to deliver education. So in September 1969, just a few months after the OU had received its Royal Charter, the OU moved into the studios at Alexandra Palace, recently vacated by the BBC News Service. The plan was to produce 150 television programmes and 150 radio programmes for the first 4 foundation courses by January 1971, when teaching would begin. So in this next clip, from an oral history interview recorded in 2009, Robin Wilson, OU Emeritus Professor and son of Prime Minister Harold Wilson, describes the partnership between the OU and the BBC and the creation of OU programmes.
But it was very exciting, quite daunting going to Alexandra Palace. I mean, the very exciting thing about the OU in the early days is that all the math producers were people with mathematics degrees, and in some cases they even had PhDs in mathematics. And their job was to take our batty ideas and turn them into good teaching television material. Because sometimes we had great ideas of what we wanted to do, which would have been impractical. And it was really a partnership, and we really did work together. Some of them were I learned so much about teaching through that, because they said, okay, it's a good idea. Now I think we should do it this way, or we talked about the most effective way of doing it. So you got something which you had taught often to students, but how do you get it across on television? What graphics you? Unlike a lecture where you just think of it the previous night and you turn up and lecture, or even think of it while you're on your feet. Of course, everything had to be thought of 6 weeks in advance because you had to commission the graphics. So you need to know exactly what you want to do. So actually constructing scripts and having your scripts pulled to pieces by the producer and so working together, I think that was one of the most important features of the OU in the early days, working closely with the BBC. And this was television and radio. Television, there's 2 studios at Alexandra Palace, Studio A and Studio B. We used to usually rehearse in B and then do it in A. Then we had 2 days to record. And we spent all the first day rehearsing the different scenes till we got the camera work just right. We were just right. We stood in exactly the right place. We said the right things. We did it over and over again so we knew what we had to say. And then the next day we did that for most of the day until 4:30. And then between 4:30 and 5:30 was a take. And it's a 25-minute programme, and we had an hour. So we were able to make the occasional mistake, but we couldn't make mistakes with every scene. I remember one particularly traumatic occasion when the very last scene we had, we'd run out of time because there'd been a sort of complicated sequence. So the very last scene I had to record, we didn't have time to rehearse. I had to do it straight, and we had to get it right first time. And it involved cutting a cake or something like this, and sort of talking about it and everything, and getting everything. Fortunately, it worked out okay, but there was a lot of tension involved.
So Robin Wilson there. Okay, so television programmes provided the opportunity, not usually available in traditional lectures, to bring in props, include external footage, conduct interviews with famous people in a particular field, and demonstrate experiments. So one of the programmes for the first technology course, for example, was a 20-minute interview with Alex Moulton, the designer of the famous Moulton bicycle, where Moulton talks about the development of his designs and shows his ideas. This next clip I'm going to play you is taken from one of the first science programmes, so one of the first BBC programmes that was put out for students in that first year, where Dr. Sidney Manton, a cat breeder and specialist in artificial selection, was interviewed by Mike Pence. So as well as interviewing Dr. Manton, the television setting allowed for her to bring in some of the cats she bred. Here's Dr. Sidney Manton. Okay. So, moving on. So from the very beginning, the OU has looked at ways of using the latest technology to assist with distance teaching. In 1994, the OU trialled an online virtual summer school, and by 1999, the first fully online OU undergraduate course was launched, which was a technology course. But back in 1979, the OU was already looking at using emerging digital technologies. This clip that I'm going to show you next shows a new device invented by the OU called Cyclops. It was never widely rolled out, but it shows an interesting way of using television in an interactive way.
Lecturers in the university's maths and technology faculties have developed a versatile tool called Cyclops, which uses the student's own television set, although it's not yet in general use. Chris Pinches explains.
This is a perfectly ordinary audio cassette, but the signals recorded on it are rather unusual. They enable this cassette to contain a complete audio-visual teaching package using sound and pictures like this one on the screen of my TV set. I've actually had to stop the tape to show this static picture, but to illustrate the system in action, let me swap to a language teaching tape which we've made. I'll just clean the screen first. Obviously, you cannot simply play an audio cassette directly into a TV set. The box that enables us to link the two was developed at the OU. We called it Cyclops. Inside the box is a memory and a microcomputer. The memory stores a whole screen full of information under the control of the cassette tape. The point about this system is both the audio cassette and ultimately the box itself will be cheap enough for a student to have at home. What I've shown you so far is only the first of 3 modes in which Cyclops can operate. The second enables it to be used as an electronic blackboard for teaching by telephone.
Well, for this second function of the machine, you need this clever little gimmick called a light pen. And with it, you can write on the screen of a normal TV set, like this. You just put the thing up against the screen, depress the switch, and you get a picture formed. And if you make a mistake, well then you just push the switch at the side here, and now I can selectively erase. I can use it as an eraser. And then back to writing again. It flashes because that tells me that the command has been accepted. And now I can write on there and correct it. Now, that's the sort of thing you can do with this light pen, but you can actually send that signal down a telephone line. And let me show you how that might work. Let's see if there's somebody on the end. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, David, it's Graham. Are you all fixed up for your meeting in Bedford this week?
No, I've never been there before, actually, so if you could explain how I get there, that would be very useful.
OK, fine. I'll try and draw you a little map. I'll have to clear the screen. I've got something on this end. You're all fixed up at your end, are you?
Yes, I'm all connected.
Right, OK. Well, now, you should be able to find the bridge over the river in the centre of Bedford. And that's the River Ouse. And then there's the Market Square and the High Street. And the centre is about there.
Ah, I see. So if I come up here, I can get round and get into here, can I?
Well, not really, no. You have to go around the block because, let me just wipe that over. You can't go that way. You have to go round that way because of the one-way system and in there.
I see. Could you tell me, is there any way to park round there?
Yes, you can park actually in the centre, in there somewhere.
Ah. Is that the County Hotel just there on the left?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
All right. OK, thank you very much indeed then, Graham.
OK, pleasure. See you then. Bye.
See you.
Now, you can see how the system could work, but that was just talking to, say, one student. In principle, you could talk to any number of students, and each one of them can write on their own TV screen, and everybody else can see what they're writing. And you could do that at any distance, say from here to New York if you like.
That clip definitely wins the best outfits and moustache prize, I think, in my presentation. So staying with computers, let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to finish today with one of my favourite archive clips, which looks at the area of assessment of OU students. So this last clip was taken from an early 70s programme which included a tour of the OU's data processing department. So within this department, the team processed the computer-marked assignments, CMAs. Sometimes less high-tech methods had to be found to solve problems, as you'll see at the end of this clip.
This is the Open University computer, which has been installed just a year now. It's working 24 hours a day, or almost that, on university business. And you may wonder why we use it. First of all, the scale of our operations. There are 31,000 students registered with the university, and there are a substantial number of operations to be performed with our rather complicated system of teaching. During the year, the computer is used to conduct the continuous assessment program, which, as you know, is broken down into tutor-marked assignments and computer-marked assignments. In the case of the computer-marked assignments, it's more direct, and this device here, the document reader, is used to read the assignments which are sent in and to score them, and again to record the grades. Here is the batch of them being read in. You'll note that a proportion of them are rejected, and some are also thrown into the late pocket. We've marked something like 250,000 of these. We've never found one that's been actually incorrectly read by the computer. There is a fourth category into which the forms may be put, and that is the wrecks. The forms are so crumpled, probably by the handling they receive in the post, that the machine cannot read them. If this happens, we have to use an iron to smooth them out.
So I absolutely love that idea of having to iron the crumpled exam papers, and that poor lady standing there with the iron all day. So that's a quick tour of some of the archive materials we have relating to the early years of the OU. All the clips I've shown today are available to view on the OU Digital Archive. Please do visit the site and explore some of our online exhibitions and collections. Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you.
That was absolutely amazing, Ruth. I've been keeping up with the comments in the chat, and I think that, yeah, the guy with the moustache is my favourite, my favourite in the entire archive, and yes, the cats are also a favourite of mine. There was one question popped up from Neil. I was wondering, on your media archiving policy, do you archive just stuff that's been pre-recorded for the module, or do you archive live recordings as well? And if yes, how long do you archive stuff for?
Okay, so we've, since the very beginning of the university, because we used the BBC and we worked together with the BBC, there was a workflow whereby the library received all the television programmes as a matter of course. That continued until we stopped broadcasting teaching programmes on the BBC in about 2004-ish. And then quite a lot of the materials were either sent out as kind of DVDs or VHS, or now, of course, they're embedded into our websites on the VLE, the Virtual Learning Environment. So they all get archived. So we web archive the VLE sites. That's quite a new thing for us, but we're working on it. We've archived several hundred sites, and we also aim to archive the individual video assets outside of the websites as well. So in terms of live events, obviously the OU, the main kind of live events that happen with students are kind of face-to-face, tutorials, forums, that kind of thing. We don't archive those for data protection reasons, so we wouldn't archive anything with direct student participation. But we do archive internal events that happen in the university, and those, again, most of those are archived permanently if they're kind of major university events and that kind of thing. I think that answers your question. Yeah, I hope so.
And that's it on the questions, unless anyone has anything else for Ruth. If you do, pop it into the Q&A, give another couple of seconds. Nope, that looks like it's it. Thank you so much, Ruth. I do thoroughly recommend having a look around the digital archive. Ruth and the archive team do an amazing job in keeping everything up to date and putting together exhibitions. So the Jenny Lee exhibition is really, really good, and there's also some other exhibitions about the history of the OU and some other things on there as well. So please do check it out.